How Bill Clinton went from signing the Defense of Marriage Act in 1996 to disavowing it today. I'm Rick Burke for the New York Times. Peter Baker covered the Clinton White House and joins me now from Washington. Now, Peter, you were there that night. You remember that night when Clinton signed DOMA under the cover of darkness. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about today, 17 years later. It's front page news. The Supreme Court takes up the issue this week. But back in the day, it was something Bill Clinton was trying to keep under the rug. He didn't really like signing this bill. It defined under federal law marriage to be the union of a man and woman, and he felt trapped by Republicans who were trying to maneuver him into a bad position just weeks before an election. He'd been out on the campaign trail for 4 days. He lands back at the White House after dark, heads to the Oval Office and signs the bill at 12:50 a.m. Literally, nobody knew that he had done it. The press secretary gets a call home saying, should we announce it or wait till the morning? And I remember the next morning we wrote the story. It turned out to be 9 paragraphs in the next day's newspaper. It seemed like a theoretical political issue.
Peter, you fell into their trap of not playing it up big as a story.
I did, in a way, absolutely. I mean, at the time, it seemed like more of a theoretical issue, a political issue. It didn't seem like something that was genuinely changing law in the country, in the sense that no state at that time had same-sex marriage. So it seemed more.
But let's think about this. I mean, I remember the year right after he got elected, I wrote a piece for the Times Magazine on Bob Hatoy, the first openly gay man at the White House. He had all kinds of gay friends, from fundraisers from California and so forth. So wasn't the gay community at the time surprised that he did this, or maybe not?
Oh, yeah, very surprised and very angry, a lot of people, obviously. That's what makes it such an interesting story, because Bill Clinton was really the first president to openly court the gay community, to openly embrace their priorities. He pushed for a workplace non-discrimination law. He had, as you pointed out, openly gay advisors. He pushed for AIDS funding. He tried to get the military to open its doors to gays and lesbians, didn't succeed, got a compromise that people didn't like called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So when this came up, it felt like a betrayal, I think, to a lot of his friends who considered it an act of calculation of politics over principle. And I think he's tried to live with that for the next 17 years.
But Peter, when you talk about him living with it, and this was a purely political, pragmatic act, reading your piece today in the Times, you say he advised John Kerry to take the same position when Kerry was running for election. So was he really, in his heart, is your sense, being pragmatic, or did he really think gays should not have be able to get married?
Well, first of all, he denies the report about telling Kerry that in 2004. We should point that out. Secondly, I think he's been conflicted. I mean, his position heading into 1996, was not in favor of same-sex marriage. And let's face it, a lot of, most politicians of that era were in the same position. He was not unique in that regard. Very few, even Democrats, were for same-sex marriage. Even civil unions hadn't really come up as a widely accepted idea. So to him, the calculation was, is it worth risking a second term over vetoing a bill that had such large margins in both houses that his veto would have been overridden anyway? But it has always been a conflict with President Clinton between pragmatism and principle, between calculation and where his heart is. So I think he's struggled with those issues over the years, and like many Americans in the last few years, has come to see that his old position, no longer to him makes sense the way it once did.
Where does Hillary Clinton's statement on the same issue fit into this equation?
Of course, she came out very quickly after President Clinton repudiated DOMA this month and said she too was for same-sex marriage. She explained she couldn't have said that the last 4 years when she was still in office as Secretary of State. It wouldn't have been appropriate for the nation's top diplomat to weigh in on a domestic issue. Now she's come out for it. People think that suggests that she's obviously heading toward, the runway for a 2016 presidential race.
Let's not get started with the next presidential campaign just yet.
Oh, come on, we're already 3 months in. Are you kidding? But look, I think she would have said this whether she's running for president anyway. I think that she, felt that she was, trying to catch up to where her party is and where her supporters are. So it doesn't necessarily tell us anything about her ambitions.
Is it your sense that she worked on her husband, or that Chelsea had a role, or any of the other gay friends of Bill Clinton over the years had a role?
I think clearly Chelsea, like a lot of families, the younger people have been more open to same-sex marriage than the parents, and they have nudged them along. Chelsea came out for same-sex marriage in New York the day before President Clinton endorsed legislation there. And I think he's listened to his gay friends and gay supporters going back years, and they've said to him, why are you on this side of the issue when you agree with us on so many other issues? And he, he sort of inched his way over the last 4 years, especially closer and closer toward it. He said on a rope line, I'm not against same-sex marriage anymore. Then he gives an interview to Anderson Cooper. Then he comes out for the New York legislation and finally tapes robocalls in North Carolina last year, urging voters there to reject a constitutional ban on same-sex marriage. So he's kind of piece by piece moved closer toward the position where he is today.
Okay, now final question. Peter, I want you to do a journalistic redo. If you could go back 17 years, would you rewrite that story and would you lobby for it to be on page 1?
Oh, absolutely, of course. I don't think, my mistake at the time, I think a lot of people's mistake at the time was not to recognize how significant an issue this really was and how relevant and tangible it would be in the years to come. Again, at that time, nobody thought that it had any impact on real lives. What one of President Clinton's aides said was, why risk a second term on something where nobody's life will change the next day?
Right. Peter, thank you.
It did eventually change pretty quickly.
Thanks much, Peter. I'm Rick Burke for the New York Times.